It all started with small things. Small things that I initially didn't put first. What was wrong that night? Why was my heart beating faster when I stood next to her? Why did ordinary situations suddenly seem unusual? I tried to ignore it, but the more I tried, the more these little details looked like hints of something much worse. Maybe it was just my paranoia, I thought. Maybe I was overthinking. But everything felt so real that it couldn't just be a coincidence. At first, it was the glances. Glances she threw when she thought I wouldn't notice. They were cold, distant, as if she was looking at me, but was far away at the same time. How can I describe it? Maybe for someone this might seem trivial, but I could feel something was wrong. She had always been so open, naturally, but now her eyes seemed to avoid mine, as if she was trying not to draw my attention. Every glance felt like a thin line drawn between us, as if she was trying to hide something. Then came the calls. The calls she answered and quickly hid from me, as if I had no right to hear them. At first, it was subtle, but over time, I began to see how nervous she became when her phone rang, and every time she looked at it, her reaction was strange. She would become distant for a few seconds, never answered the calls near me, and always tried to go to another room to talk. Before, she never hid her phone, and we always shared everything. But now, it felt like something different, like someone else had become a part of her life that I knew nothing about. Still, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was focusing too much on small things that didn't matter. I tried to convince myself that she was just busy, that her work or other concerns were taking up her thoughts. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more I felt something was off. And then I saw something I could never forget, even if I tried very hard. One day, when I came home earlier than usual, I found her in a room with the door closed. Her phone was ringing on the table, but she didn't pick it up or answer. However, I noticed how her hands trembled when she grabbed the phone and how quickly she pressed the decline button, as if she was afraid I'd discover something she didn't want to show. That moment became decisive, and I realized that my suspicions might be more real than I thought. Maybe it was just a growing sense of inner anxiety, but I couldn't turn a blind eye to these moments any longer. That's when I decided to do something I would never have dared to do before. Check her phone. I knew it was a breach of trust, but at that moment I couldn't leave it unanswered. I had to find out the truth. The more I tried to close my eyes to everything, the more these little moments returned to me, like shadows that refused to disappear. Each day, I felt my suspicions growing stronger. At first, it was just glances, strange calls she hid when she thought I wasn't looking. But now, these little signs had snowballed into something undeniable. I woke up at night, came home from work, and noticed how she tried to hide her phone when it rang. But now, it wasn't just an unpleasant feeling. It became unbearable. All these moments accumulated, and I could no longer escape the obsessive thought that something was wrong. So, I began to watch her, more than ever before. I paid attention to every detail of her behavior, every move, every glance. I didn't want to believe it, but I was increasingly convinced it wasn't just a coincidence. But why hadn't I asked her earlier? Why didn't I just approach her and ask? Perhaps I was afraid of the answer, afraid of hearing something I wouldn't be able to bear. And perhaps that was my biggest mistake, remaining silent. Instead of addressing the situation, I endured it, sinking deeper into my own doubts. Then, one evening, after she once again disappeared with her phone in her hands, hiding in another room, I realized I couldn't live in the unknown any longer. My suspicion had reached its peak, and so I stood at the crossroads, continue enduring or take action. I decided to act. While she was out of the room, I took her phone. It wasn't that I was ready to break the trust between us. I just couldn't live in this chaos any longer. I felt that this was the final step, the last chance to uncover the truth I sought, even if it would shock me. My breathing was heavy, and my heart raced as my fingers pressed the unlock button. I tried to stay calm, though every cell of my body was tense like standing on the edge of a knife. And then I saw her messages. I scrolled through the screen, not believing my eyes until I came across one line I would never have believed if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. It was a message, and not just a message, but one that changed everything. She was writing to him. I didn't know who he was, but what I saw was so obvious that I couldn't deny it. "Will you come today? I'll be home alone, waiting for you." These were her words, and those words started to echo in my head like a heavy bell resonating against the walls. They were written a few days before I found out about it. But what struck me even more was how casually she said it to him, as if it was nothing, as if it was a normal thing. And worse, I saw a few more messages like that. Her heart clearly didn't belong to me. All my doubts became reality. My worst fears were confirmed. And now I stood there with her phone in my hands, feeling the ground slipping out from under me. My reality had changed forever. I realized it wasn't just betrayal. It was so much more than I could have imagined. And at that moment, as I stared at those messages, I already knew I couldn't leave it like this. I had to find out who this man was and what happened between them. When I saw the name on the screen, I immediately felt my heart skip a few beats. It was his number, my best friend, the person I had known since childhood, someone I trusted as much as I trusted myself, the one I shared everything with, from the best moments of life to the biggest disappointments. And now, this number on the screen felt like a verdict. It wasn't just a message. It was a bloody stain on something I once considered unbreakable. I reread it again, and again. I couldn't believe my eyes. That message, it was from him, my friend, and he was writing to her something I could never have imagined. "You're mine, and we can't hide it anymore. We will be together. I love you." The very words I longed to hear from my wife were now coming from the lips of someone I trusted above all else. And she responded to him as if there had never been anything between us, as if all those years together meant nothing. Her words in that message were so tender, so candid. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't have believed my friend was capable of something like this. It felt like everything I knew up until that moment began to crumble, like pieces of a mosaic falling to the floor, impossible to piece back together. This was betrayal. No, not just betrayal. This was a deep wound that pierced my soul. I felt the blood rushing to my head, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I stared at those words, unable to breathe. This was my best friend, the person I trusted, and now I found out he had slept with my wife. All those years we spent together, laughing, sharing secrets, it all became an illusion. I was blind, a fool. She smiled at me to my face, while behind my back, she gave him what belonged to me. It was a blow to the heart. I couldn't understand how this had happened. How did I not notice? How did I not see the signs earlier? But what was even worse, it wasn't just her betrayal. It was the betrayal of the one I considered my friend. My worst nightmare come true. I struggled to breathe. I felt my chest tighten, an unbearable pain coursing through every cell of my body. 1,000 thoughts swirled in my head, but none of them provided any relief. It was despair, the worst I'd ever felt in my life. I just stood there, clutching the phone in my hands, not knowing what to do next. I couldn't understand why. Why him? Why her? From that moment, everything began to feel unnatural. My reality had shattered. All those years, I thought we had gone through everything together, now felt ridiculous. She told him he was her only desire. She told him he was her future. And all of this happened under my nose while I lived in blind confidence. Every moment, every day spent together, every laugh, every memory I held dear now seemed like a farce, a massive deception. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront her, break the silence, and tell her everything I was feeling. I wanted to lash out and cast him out of my life, but I stayed rooted in place, not knowing where to go next. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a war against everything I held sacred, a war against my trust, my emotions, and everything I thought I had. My friend, my wife. It was all gone, and I was left with a void in my heart, now filled with anger and pain. I sat on the couch, holding her phone in my hands, feeling my fingers tremble. My head was full of thoughts without beginning or end. How did this happen? How could I not see that my wife and my best friend were scheming behind my back? How could they be so ruthless? On one hand, I was consumed by anger that tore me apart inside. This wasn't just betrayal. It was betrayal of the worst kind. My friend, my brother in spirit, had betrayed me in a way no one else ever could. And yet, as I stared at her phone, as those messages continued to appear on the screen, I felt another emotion that was hard to admit. Love. Love for her. I still loved her. How could this be? How could I continue to love someone who had so shamelessly destroyed everything we had? All those years together, all the moments we laughed, shared our fears, plans, and dreams, it all now seemed like a lie. And at the same time, it still felt real to me. How could I just give all of it up? How could I stop loving her even after what I had discovered? My heart was torn in two, no matter how hard I tried to figure out what was right and what was wrong. My anger was intense, lifting me up and keeping me in this constant state of anxiety. I felt it consuming me from the inside. But another part of me, deeply buried, still longed for her. And I couldn't understand why. It was incredibly hard to believe, yet it was what my heart felt. My wife. I still loved her despite everything she had done. And that left me even more lost. I looked at the phone and thought about what to do with this information. Should I tell her everything? Should I pretend nothing happened? I felt the air around me grow heavier as the full realization of her betrayal suffocated me. And yet, I felt I couldn't just let her go. All those years meant too much to me. I wasn't ready to give them up. Maybe I was a fool, but I still believed in us. How could this be? How could I continue to love someone who had broken my heart? I wanted to ask her why she did it, but I was afraid the truth would be even worse than I imagined. And yet, I couldn't forget those moments when we were together, those simple evenings when we just sat in silence, laughing at something trivial. I didn't want to lose those memories. I didn't know if I had the strength to tell her everything I was thinking, or if I should just walk away and leave it all behind. How do you let go of someone you love, even after everything that's happened? Was it worth fighting for this love, or was it already lost? I felt pain mixing with anger and love, creating chaos in my soul. Should I go back to her, or just leave it all behind? Every option seemed terrifying. I couldn't figure out what to do. How could I deal with these emotions, with this truth that everything had changed? I wasn't ready, but I knew one thing. I couldn't leave it unanswered. I had to make a choice, but even now, sitting in an empty room with her phone in my hands, I didn't know how it would all end. All those hours spent in silence became a true battle with myself. How could I allow myself to leave it all unanswered? This wasn't just betrayal. It was deception that touched my deepest emotions. My friend, my wife, they destroyed everything I believed in. I couldn't let them walk away unpunished. I couldn't just forget it. They had to pay for what they did. And I decided I would seek revenge. It wasn't easy. My anger flared within me with such force that I could hardly think clearly. Every second without action felt like an eternity, and despair and pain only pushed me toward decisive steps. I started planning how to confront them, how to make them feel the same thing I felt, how to show them that betrayal cannot go unpunished. And I already envisioned how I would do it. I wanted them to know the truth at the most painful moment. It was a matter of time. I thought about a confrontation, where I would just lay everything out on the table, put them face to face with the fact that I knew everything. I saw in my mind how my friend, and she would look confused and scared when it all came out. I imagined how they would try to justify themselves, how she would cry, and how he would be ashamed for destroying my life. It was a plan that only stoked the fire in my soul. They had to pay. I couldn't let it go unpunished. But then, just as I began to piece together the steps of my revenge plan, feeling that everything was under control, I received a call. It was my friend, the very one who had committed such a terrible betrayal against me. I looked at the screen of the phone, and my heart stopped for a moment. He was calling, and it wasn't just a call. He seemed ready to tell me something that was meant to change everything. I didn't know what to do. I could have ignored it, severing ties forever, cutting him out of my life as I wanted. My anger boiled, but I knew it wouldn't be fair to myself. He had to explain what was happening so that I could find out why he betrayed me and how it happened. I picked up the phone and answered. His voice on the other end of the line was filled with nervous tension. It was as if he didn't know how to start, but was forced to do so. He began apologizing, but I heard not sincerity in his words, but fear. He couldn't deny what he had done, but he couldn't stay silent either. "I know you found out everything," he said, and his voice seemed unusually quiet, almost frightened. I couldn't live with this lie anymore. My thoughts froze. I couldn't believe he was actually calling me, trying to explain the inexplicable. He continued, and I listened, even though I didn't want to hear it. He said that what happened between him and my wife was more than just physical betrayal. He admitted that he had feelings for her. It wasn't just sex. It was an attempt to build something more. I listened to this, and my heart filled with pain once again. More than any betrayal, these words hurt me the most. He hadn't just broken my trust. He tried to take what was mine in the worst way possible. Everything changed now. My desire for revenge grew even stronger. I didn't know what to do with all these emotions anymore. I was on the verge of an explosion, and only one thought circled in my mind. They had to feel what I was feeling now. But what would I do next? I didn't know yet, but the call made me realize that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone in my hands, trying to calm down. My friend called again. I immediately understood that he had no right to make a choice. He had to explain what had happened, or I would never forgive him. My hands trembled as I pressed the answer button. I tried to leave all emotions behind, and though I was full of anger, I realized that this call was my last chance to hear the whole truth. If I truly cared about closure, this was my ultimate test. "Hello," I said, trying to make my voice as calm as possible. But inside, I was literally boiling with frustration and anger. He was silent for a few seconds, and in the silence, I could hear his heavy breathing. This wasn't just an apology. This was a call of confession. His voice sounded as if he couldn't believe what he was about to say. "I know you found out everything," he began softly, almost ashamed, like a person trying to avoid responsibility for their actions. "But I don't know how to explain this. I have to tell you the truth." I tried to leave his words behind, but they still reached my consciousness like a heavy wave, flooding every inch of my body. "Don't torture me," I replied, unable to hold back. "What do you want to say?" And then he said something that I was sure made my heart freeze in place. "She betrayed me too." He paused, and I felt every loud breath of his destabilizing me further. I couldn't believe my ears. This wasn't just about me anymore. It had become an even greater tragedy that overshadowed everything. But he didn't stop. What he said next was even more shocking. And not only that, it was even worse. I fell silent. My heart grew heavy like a stone. My thoughts scattered like broken shards of glass. I waited for him to continue. But deep inside, I felt that what I was about to hear would change everything. "She didn't just betray me," he continued, "but she wasn't even honest with you. She was involved with someone else too." And I found out who it was. Those words pierced me to the core. He said it as if it was clear that they both had to share this terrible secret. I couldn't comprehend how all of this had happened. My wife, who was my partner, my greatest support, had now betrayed me not only with my best friend, but with someone else as well. How could this be? Had she been with him all along without me even suspecting? It hurt to hear these words, and he knew it. He could hear my breathing grow heavier, the words stuck in my throat. You don't want to know this, but I have to tell you. She didn't just leave both of us behind. She started seeing someone I couldn't even imagine. He paused. And in that moment, I was bracing for the worst. She was seeing my brother. Those words left me in absolute shock. My mind couldn't process this information. My body refused to accept it. How could this happen? She had betrayed me with my friend and then started seeing his brother? This wasn't just a breach of trust. This was a complete and utterly horrifying collapse. I heard his words, but they sounded distant, like echoes from far away. I don't know what to do, he continued. I felt like you deserved the truth, and I couldn't stay silent any longer. But what could I say to him? How was I supposed to react to what he had just told me? My mind struggled to grasp this as reality, so I stayed silent. I just listened because every word made me feel worse than I already did. My heart was racing, and all this news was tearing me apart. My soul felt empty as I listened to my friend's words, but perhaps the worst was yet to come. I couldn't believe that what I had just learned was the extent of what she had done. Betrayal with my friend was already a heavy blow, but what came next turned out to be even bigger than I could have imagined. My wife, she hadn't just betrayed me with him. It was worse. I still couldn't accept that this blow came not only from my friend, but also from someone I would never have suspected. How did this happen? How could this even be possible? It turned out she hadn't just been with my friend. She had been with his brother too. Yes, you heard that right. And in that moment, when I heard this, my heart froze. She hadn't just broken my trust. She had stomped on every piece of our shared history. I sat there, unable to believe my own ears. I knew she had been acting differently. I had felt it. But this was more than I could have ever imagined. I didn't know what to say. I just listened as my friend, who had once been like a brother to me, now explained what had been happening behind my back. His words, though painful, wouldn't let me rest. She wasn't just with him, he continued. She didn't even try to hide it. And even when I found out this was happening, I started realizing that maybe all of this was part of her plan. He fell silent, as if trying to find the right words, and I felt his voice tremble. I tried to pull myself together, but my thoughts were a chaotic mess. How could this be? How could she disregard everything we had built so completely? I thought I knew her. I thought she was honest, open, but now I realized I had been blind. It turned out that her relationship with my friend's brother was much more intimate than I could have imagined. This wasn't just physical seduction. It was a bond she had nurtured and maintained even while being with me. I listened to him describe it, and with every word, I felt everything falling apart. How had I missed this? Why hadn't I suspected? But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she never intended to hide it. She allowed him, her partner, to be part of her life while I stood aside, clueless. My wife and my friend's brother, the people closest to me, they had jointly made me feel more betrayed than ever before. I felt my heart burning with anger. My fingers clenched into fists, ready to bring all of this truth to light. It was hard to breathe, hard to accept this fact. She had been with him. She had been with both of them. And it was far worse than I could have ever imagined. I couldn't understand how this all happened. How could I have been so blind to what was going on? How could she look me in the eyes and smile, while at the same time, behind my back, everything was happening just as she wanted? She had used me to cover up her true intentions. But what happened next was even more incomprehensible. Why? Why did she do this? What drove her to act this way? This wasn't just betrayal. It was something much more. It was a plan I hadn't noticed, and one that was now tearing my heart apart. My body was filled with pain and anger. I didn't know where to go with this knowledge, how to live with it. She had betrayed me with both of them, my friend and his brother. And honestly, I didn't even know how to process it. I wasn't just betrayed now. I was humiliated, destroyed. I no longer had the strength or faith that I could ever move past this. I sat in the darkness, contemplating every word he had said to me. My friend, my former brother in spirit, had cast me aside, betrayed me, but now I stood before another truth. A truth I wasn't ready to hear. She had to explain this. I couldn't leave it for later. I absolutely had to find out why she did it. She sat in front of me. I could see the pain radiating from her eyes, how she couldn't hold my gaze. I looked at her, feeling how her presence filled the space between us, but the closeness we once had was no longer there. I sat silently, unsure if I should speak or leave everything as it was. She remained silent too. I couldn't bear the silence any longer. And then she spoke. "I don't know how to start," she began, her voice trembling with anxiety. "Maybe I should have told you this a long time ago, but I was afraid you wouldn't understand." Her words, her gaze, her sorrowful expression. This was the moment when everything began to come together, forming a picture I had been blind to for so long. She started to speak about what she had been feeling, and her words made me shudder. "I felt lonely," she said, and I saw her hands begin to tremble. "It didn't matter what I did. You just didn't see me. You didn't notice that I was there with you. You were busy, always thinking about work, about your own things, and I was left out. I was just a shadow. I wasn't important to you." Those words struck me deeply, and though I didn't want to admit it, I felt my soul tearing apart. I had always thought I was doing everything right, that I was giving her everything she wanted. But it turned out I had missed what was most important to her. I hadn't noticed her feelings. And even now, as I heard these words, I couldn't say it justified her actions. But it hit me even harder. How could I have been so blind? "I didn't know who to turn to," she continued. "I had you, but you weren't there for me. I tried to fill that gap, to fill that emptiness, but you didn't see it. You didn't notice how much I needed you, your attention, your love. And then when I met him, everything changed. He was there. He understood me. I couldn't listen to this without despair. I tried to find words to respond, but they wouldn't come. She had betrayed me again, but now, listening to her, I felt pain mixing with anger. I couldn't understand why her emptiness couldn't have been filled simply by my presence. Why couldn't she just talk to me, ask what was wrong? But instead, she turned to someone else, to my friend, to his brother. And not just that. Now she was telling me how he understood her, how she had found what I couldn't give her. "I know I deceived you," she said, her voice growing weaker. But I felt how every word struck me harder. "I shouldn't have done it, and I understand that I've hurt you, but you weren't there for me. I was scared that you were already gone, and that's why I turned to him. And it became more than just a physical connection. It became something I couldn't find in our relationship." My hands trembled as I listened to her words. How could she treat everything we had like this? How could she betray what we had built? But with every word she spoke, I understood more and more that her betrayal wasn't just about me not noticing her. It was much deeper. It was her struggle with herself, her feelings of unworthiness and loneliness. I wasn't her everything, and in searching elsewhere, she found what she had been missing. And now, here I was, standing before this truth, before her confession, and I didn't know what to do with it. It wouldn't let me rest, but at the same time, everything inside me was asking, can this be forgiven? Can what was lost be restored? It was more than I could imagine, and now, as I stood before her, trying to understand what had happened, I felt my entire world falling apart. This was a true catastrophe, and now I couldn't find the strength to forgive her, even though, deep down, I still loved her. It was hard to breathe as I listened to her confession, but I knew I had to act. The warmth in the room became unbearable, and the world around me suddenly felt so foreign. I sat before her, her eyes slightly tearful, but I felt my soul growing colder. Every word she spoke, every breath she took, seemed to tear me away from everything I once believed. But even despite all the pain she had caused, and despite all her betrayals, I couldn't stay stuck in this mire. I couldn't continue living in deception and destruction. I realized that under no circumstances could anything go back to the way it was. I couldn't simply forgive everything that had happened. I couldn't find the strength to return to what no longer existed. This was the point where I could no longer endure, where there was no room for restoration. I could choose the path of revenge, unleash all my anger on her, but that wouldn't bring me peace. And then, as my thoughts clenched under the weight of pain, I made a decision that shocked even me and everyone around me. I decided to let it all go. It was a radical decision, and it wasn't just about forgiveness, because I couldn't forgive everything that had happened. It wasn't about trying to return to what we once had. I wouldn't allow myself to leave these wounds open. I made the decision to start a new life, without them, without this broken world I had once built. I was ready to leave this painful cycle, and most importantly, I was ready to find a new path. I can't be with you, and I can't continue living the way I used to, I told her, though each word felt as heavy as a burden. I knew this was what I had to do, but it was still hard to feel. She sat before me, her face full of despair, but I could see that she was beginning to understand that nothing could be changed now. I stood up, and it wasn't just a physical act, but an emotional detachment from her. I could no longer be with this person. I could no longer live in the shadow of what she had done. I began a new life, and it wasn't just about escaping the pain. It was about rebuilding myself, finding a new identity beyond all the broken relationships. The first days after I decided to leave everything behind were the hardest. I didn't know where to start. Every corner of this life reminded me of her, of what had happened. But I felt something changing within me. I no longer clung to memories or thoughts of what could have been if I had stayed in that relationship. I threw myself into new activities. I began working on myself, physically, emotionally, psychologically. I took on new challenges, reconnected with people I hadn't seen in a long time. I rediscovered old interests I had long forgotten, rekindled my love for travel and new experiences. This was my path, the path to recovery and self-discovery. I didn't let the betrayers leave a permanent mark on my life. I decided I wouldn't let them shape my future. And now, months later, I see the results. I've learned so much about myself, about who I am when I'm not tied to people who don't respect me. I've met new people, and though my heart hasn't fully healed yet, I see that I'm on the right path. I'm learning to love myself again, to value myself, to be the person I truly want to be. This was my victory, not because I sought revenge, but because I let it all go. I embraced my new life, a life that was now solely mine, and I don't regret my decision. That decision changed everything. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection, and though my eyes were weary and betrayed, I saw something new in them. I had changed. My reality had changed. Everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and relationships turned out to be an illusion. My wife, my friend, they destroyed everything we had, but in the end it gave me new clarity. Now I know that betrayal isn't just about physical infidelity. Betrayal begins the moment you stop feeling connected, when honesty fades, when your emotions and needs no longer matter to the person closest to you. She had been with him, but the real betrayal wasn't just about that. It was her longing for something she lacked, emotional support, attention, intimacy that I hadn't given her. And now I see that betrayal in a relationship starts from this, from emotional absence. Everything that happened was just the result of that longing, that desperate attempt to find what was missing. And though it doesn't absolve them of responsibility for what happened, I've come to understand that betrayal is much deeper than just physical intimacy. I started a new life, and it was a big victory for me, but not everything was so simple. I haven't fully healed yet. I haven't completely left behind all the resentment and pain that remains in my soul. But I feel that every day without them brings me closer to who I'm meant to be. I'm learning to trust again. And it's not easy because every step forward comes with pain and doubt. I understand that this will be a long journey, and I don't know what lies ahead. I've discovered new horizons, new opportunities, new connections with people who truly value me for who I am. But this is only the beginning. Now, for the first time in a long time, I feel alive again, and I know that there will be even more challenges ahead. And though I've left this dark chapter of my life behind, I understand that time cannot be turned back. Everything that happened has forever changed me. But is this the end of the story? Have I truly left it all behind? Maybe this is just the beginning of something new, something yet to be revealed. And I don't know what comes next, but I know one thing. I'm ready for new beginnings. I'm ready for life to give me more challenges and lessons I never expected. And now, after everything that's happened, I stand at the edge. My new reality awaits me. But this isn't the end.